Good Friday morning, everybody. It is September 20th, Friday, and I am off to work at 6:25 in the morning in Southern California. And today's topic, I'm going to be talking about autism again. Actually, yeah, if you're interested in the comparisons between the INTJ and the ENFP, this is not going to be a video about that. This is going to be a video about autism spectrum and if you want to say Asperger's syndrome, because it's something that I have been dealing with lately in my own life, and it's something that I continue to try to come to terms with because I still haven't really been diagnosed. I have self-diagnosed, but I have not been diagnosed with being on the spectrum. And one of the reasons for that is that the cost and the time involved and life in general make it very difficult for me to continue to move forward in that. Being in Southern California, I've looked around for different places to diagnose, and I can't seem to find any. If anybody has any resources for adults who are seeking autistic spectrum diagnosis, because as far as I can see, you have to find a psychologist who has had their hand in that. And then, I went to a psychologist who said that they knew about it, but really, after about 8 sessions 3 years ago, I was still out of work, and I was like, what is the point, when they're still focusing on all these other issues? They're like, well, you're depressed, so let's work on that. So it's like, I know I'm depressed, I know I have all these other issues. So it's like they want to strip away every other possibility before they diagnose autistic spectrum. And in the meantime, you're writing these checks for whatever, $50, $60 a session. And I was out of work at the time, so it's like, I had to focus on getting a job, and I was like, you know what, I don't, whatever I am what I am, and I need to get a job. So that was the deal with that. And so that was the last, 3 years ago was the last time I attempted to try to gain a diagnosis, but it kind of just fizzled out because of life and pressures, and just being a man and having to take care of all my responsibilities, being, taking care of rent, taking care of everything else. So essentially, yesterday I was thinking about it, and when I was a young boy in elementary school, of course I did stand out, and I did get bullied a lot. I got picked on for being different, and one of the terms that they used to call me was retardo. Okay, I laugh about it now, but or they called me retard, or they called me weirdo. One of the girls in junior high constantly called me weirdo, partially because she had a crush on me, and partially because she thought I was a weirdo. But that was one of the things she wrote in my yearbook, was to the best weirdo ever, or something like that. And a lot of people called me weird or crazy, or they would say it in a good way, like with a smile, you're weird, man, you're crazy. But of course, I was bullied because I stood out. I was, I guess, a dweeb, a nerd, or whatever you want to call it. And so one of the terms they used was this term called retardo, which comes from retarded or mentally retarded. And 40-some years ago, well, about 35 years ago, that was the thing, is that psychology had not progressed as far as it has to this day. So back in the day, in the 80s, they used to refer to slow individuals as mentally challenged, mentally retarded. And then, of course, that became a term that was akin to the use of the N-word, and it became politically incorrect to say retarded and such. But I started thinking about it. I'm like, well, what is that? What is mental retardation? And obviously, it's a deficiency in a lot of different capabilities. And so I was like, well, that's what autistic spectrum is. I mean, it's a retardation of the social skills. So I'm a retardo. We're, everybody on the autistic spectrum are retardos, I guess. But the proper terminology nowadays is autistic, So then I was like, I started looking up some different articles and such, and sure enough, that was the thing, is that psychology began to progress, and they began to categorize the different levels of autism. And of course, severe autism would, back in the day, that was a child that was mentally retarded, that had no speech skills, no language, no ability to socialize, no ability to take care of themselves. And nowadays we just call that autism, or severe autism. And so basically, from that point, they started to become a little more politically correct and say things like Asperger's. There was a terminology that came up called Asperger's, which was with regard to individuals that were able to function. They had language skills. They had mental capacity. They were smart, but they were deficient on the social side of the spectrum. And so we began, psychologists began to see a spectrum of the disabilities, and they began to look at it as a whole, And so then we get to like 1994, where I think that's where the Asperger's term came in. But more recently, Asperger's terminology in the psychology field has been termed high functioning autism. And so essentially the terminology it was confusing to me for a long time, and was because of all this, change of, what to call them and what it is, because in my head I'm still thinking, well, there's mental retardation, then there's autism, and like they're two different things. But no, it's all just varying degrees of autism. And so essentially I was like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. And so basically I was like, oh, okay, so the retardation of social skills. Now, whether that's politically correct to say or not, to me, it helps me understand that everybody is deficient in some area, okay? These are all just labels, because what really got me was, studying the whole concept of the INTJ and the ENFP, and a question to come up was, well, first of all, the whole MBTI system is really just a way of describing major components of a personality. And it's not like those are all set in stone. They're markers to indicate certain types. And are there more than just 16 types? I'm sure there are. I'm sure there's varying degrees of the spectrum, okay? So the question began to hit my mind of, is autistic spectrum really what contributes toward a person's personality type, such as the INTJ, which they have been, accused of being autistic, and it's like, well, maybe it's because they are autistic. Maybe it's because maybe we have, introverted intuition because we are we're high functioning in that area, okay? But then we have high thinking processes because we do have a deficiency on the social side of the spectrum. So then we come into a term that I would like to make more and more popular, a term that I've heard other individuals use on YouTube, which is called neurosocial. Okay? Now, a neurosocial is what most, I guess we would term neurotypical. So a neurosocial is somebody who has no deficiencies in the social aspects of culture. They know how to pick up nonverbal cues. They know how to communicate nonverbally. They know how to express their emotions. Okay? That's a neurosocial, and they have a high aptitude in the social side of the spectrum. Okay? Now, what's missing from this whole equation, of course, and is what autistics are all up in arms about, is the fact that the neurosocials, who are the majority of society, seem to be calling all the shots. They seem to be saying, we're going to decide what is the spectrum and how the spectrum should be looked at. In other words, the autistic spectrum is based on a deficiency of social skills. Okay. Now, for the ones that are like high support needs, the severely autistic, obviously, the ones that are low support needs, the ones that can function in society, the high functioning autistics have more of a say in the argument, because they have language skills, they have the ability to think more clearly. Not to say that even the severely autistic aren't thinking. We don't really have all the data on the severely autistic and what their thoughts are. Because there's been cases where even the severely autistic are very clear-minded, very clear-headed, and they communicate through typing or something, So the point of the matter is that those of us who are able to communicate through whatever means are more involved in the argument for basically the rights of the autistic, the right of the autistic to be who they are, to be that person in society they were meant to be. And again, I've talked about this before, is that there is an important aspect to the autistic individual in society. And one of the reasons is that the autistic is an early warning signal to possible predators or events that could be happening in the future. They're very adept at seeing the future and essentially another individual that I was listening to was talking about how they're compared to those individuals that are colorblind. Now, I had talked about colorblindness before, but this is in regard to the analogy of being colorblind and also mind blind, or no, not mind blind, but a neurosocial individual sees all the colors of emotion. They see all the colors of social interaction, whereas the autistic doesn't see quite that many. Maybe they just see the primary colors of social, emotional, interaction. But there was a study done comparing capuchin monkeys that were colorblind, and that there were two dominant ones. Okay, the ones that could see colors and the ones that were colorblind. And the capuchin monkey community would actually they depended upon the colorblind capuchin monkeys to point out that a predator was approaching, because something about when you're colorblind, camouflage, you can see right through camouflage. Your mind does not fill in all the blanks of when you look at a forest of trees. The tiger's fur doesn't blend in with the leaves. The capuchin monkey can just see that tiger. The colorblind capuchin monkey can see that tiger, and then screams and warns the whole community that there's a predator approaching. And this is the same way with the autistic. The autistic can see things that normal neurosocials do not see. They're blinded by it. And one of those things, I believe, is sociopathic individuals. Because sociopathic individuals that are evil, I'm just saying that I'm not putting an evil connotation on sociopathy, but what I'm saying is those individuals that are wicked, sociopathical individuals, that the autistic person can pretty much spot them right away. And the reason being is because their process of their mind, we're not processing things in the same way that the neurosocials process. The reason that the sociopathic individual is so dangerous to social neurals is because they can be easily deceived with the right social cues, and the evil sociopath knows how to manipulate and communicate socially, but deceptively, and that doesn't work with an autistic individual. And I think you see that a lot of times with animals too, like dogs and such can sense bad people, but also one of the things about being colorblind is that you can see things like, well, the capuchin monkeys can see the moths that land on like the tree bark, and they can see them, and they can catch them, and they can eat them, and therefore they bring a benefit to the community of the capuchin monkeys, because number one, they're watching out for predators, and number two, they can see different food sources that are hiding in front of them. And so there is a reason for the autistic, just as there's a reason for the neurosocial. It's just that there's more neurosocials in society. But actually, the reality is, I think that nowadays we have even more autistic adults that have been undiagnosed, and everybody is just in denial that they're autistic, or on the autistic spectrum. And I don't really like to call it a disability, because while it is a deficiency in social skills, it's also a high functioning thought process, high functioning language skills. So anyway, these are my thoughts. Basically, we're all retarded in some aspect. We're either retarded in social skills, or we're retarded in making a good value judgment, or we have high social skills and retarded thinking skills. Or so anyway, we're all retardos. Everybody just get over it. Let's all just get along. God bless everyone, and keep seeking